Before we get to the video, I would like to talk about today's sponsor, Colon Brew. I'm Nick from Paranormally Listed, and I have recently been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. To help me control my blood sugar and lower my cholesterol, I have been taking Colon Brew every day. Not only has it helped me with my blood sugars and cholesterol, but I feel less bloated and have more energy. Colon Brew is a high-fiber dietary supplement that uses the highest quality of ingredients to support your gut and microbiome health. This is how it works. The dietary fiber mixes with partially digested food in the stomach. The fiber then absorbs water and expands in our digestive tract. It then catches unwanted material. The soluble fibers then trap sugar, cholesterol, and fat, slowing the absorption into your body. Colon Brew then creates a better gut movement and removes waste. All of this helps softens the body's waste more quickly and efficiently. Not only does it help get shit done, it also lowers the risk of colon cancer and visibly improves your skin's health. I've been using Colon Brew for a few weeks now, and it's been great. Not only is the strawberry flavor a great taste, but it has helped me curb my appetite, making me feel fuller longer and not feel bloated. It is easy as taking one scoop mixed with a glass of water, and you'll feel better too. Right now, Colon Brew is doing something great for Paranormally Listed viewers. Go to colonbrew.org/paranormallylisted or click on the link in the description box below and join their biggest sale yet. Get 6 months worth of Colon Brew with up to 65% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. But as an added bonus to my viewers, use the code Paranormally10 and get an extra 10% off your whole order. So don't wait. Click the link below and grab your discounted batch of Colon Brew while stocks last. And by doing so, you'll be helping support Paranormally Listed. So don't hesitate to experience the number 1 in the number 2.
Number 3. Anatoli Bugorski. In 1978, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was ongoing. A year earlier, Jimmy Carter was sworn in as the 39th President of the United States. As the newly elected president, Carter set to change the U.S.'s foreign policy, which included better relations between the two superpowers and nuclear non-proliferation. However, the USSR had its own plans. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, the Soviets kept their secrets close to their chests. On July 13, 1978, the Soviets had a story that sounded like the origin of a comic book superhero. Anatoli Bugorski, a 36-year-old Russian particle physicist, was working on a particle accelerator at the Institute of High Energy Physics in Provino. During a test of the U-70 synchrotron, which was the world's largest accelerator at the time, it malfunctioned. Bugorski was sent to fix the problem. Unbeknownst to him, the safety measures meant to protect anyone entering the accelerator also malfunctioned. So when Bugorski stuck his head in to see what the problem was, the accelerator was running. An invisible beam of protons struck the physicist in the back of the head. The beam passed through Bugorski's brain at the speed of light. He felt no pain, but he saw a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns. However, no one noticed any problems, so Bugorski continued to work the rest of the day and didn't tell anyone what had happened. Knowing what his fate was going to be, he headed home to wait for his inevitable death. Normally, a person dies when they come into contact with 500 rads of radiation, and Bugorski received 200,000 to 300,000 rads straight to the brain. During the night, he felt uncomfortable and couldn't sleep. Also, the left side of his face had swollen to the point where he was unrecognizable. In the morning, he went to seek medical help from doctors. They sent him to a clinic in Moscow, but it wasn't for treatment. Instead, they wanted to observe him for the last moments of his life. Over the next few days, Bugorski's skin peeled around the entry wound on the back of his head. Also, the skin peeled off around the exit wound, which was his nose. The doctor could see it burn right through his skin, skull, and brain, but amazingly, he did not die. Not knowing how, doctors watched as Bugorski made a full recovery. He even returned to the same job 18 months later. He promised to appear at the Moscow clinic twice a year where doctors could keep studying him. In the following years, Bugorski's brain tissue continued to burn away, the left side of his face became paralyzed, and he also lost hearing on the left side. On the weirder side, his face only aged on the right side. Following his recovery, Bugorski completed his PhD and kept working at the U-70 synchrotron as the coordinator of physics experiments. Although missing tissue in his brain, he showed no signs of intellectual capacity, but he did suffer from seizures. Because of the Soviet secrecy on nuclear power, Bugorski was not allowed to speak about the accident. But then, in 1986, the Chernobyl disaster happened. This put the USSR's nuclear program under the microscope of the world. Over a decade after Bugorski's accident, he was now able to talk about it. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the U-70 accelerator was abandoned. In 1996, Bugorski applied for disability status to receive free medication for his epilepsy, but he was denied. Bugorski continues to live in Provino. He wants to move west to make himself available for study, but he cannot afford to move. Although no one is 100% sure why Bugorski survived the accident, doctors and researchers have a theory. They surmise that since the beam contained such a narrow focus, the beam that passed through Bugorski's brain only caused damage to the parts of the brain that he could live without. Unlike a person getting a full blast of radiation all over their body, Bugorski's vital organs were not affected. At the time of this video, Bugorski is 80 years old. Unfortunately, he has no signs of superhero abilities unless you count the one side of his face not aging. Number 2. Phineas Gage. Medical science has come a long way over the years. People are surviving now once fatal accidents. But even today, getting a 43-inch long spike through your entire brain, doctors would probably say, "That dude is screwed." However, this very accident happened in 1848, and the man became one of neuroscience's most famous patients. On September 13, 1848, Phineas Gage, a 25-year-old railroad construction foreman, was working in Cavendish, Vermont. While Gage was in charge of blasting, he would drill a hole, place an explosive in the hole, fill it with sand, and then pack it down with a metal tamping iron bar. Unfortunately, the metal bar sparked this time, causing an explosion that sent the bar skyward. But before it flew 80 feet, the 43-inch long, 1¼ inch diameter, 13-pound rod penetrated Gage's left cheek behind his eye socket and exited through the top of his head. Astonishingly, Gage survived the impalement. He even walked to a nearby train cart where there were other workers. He was rushed to the doctors in town. The whole time he remained conscious and could even remember the names of his co-workers. He was even in good spirits, saying to the doctor that he didn't want to see any of his friends from work because he would return to work in a day or two. Although he survived the seemingly impossible, Gage was not out of the woods yet. He developed an infection and was semi-comatose between September 23rd and October 3rd. It wasn't until October 7th that he took his first steps out of bed. By October 11th, he began to regain his intellectual functions. During his recovery, his doctor, John Martin Harlow, took great interest in his case. The doctor noted that Gage knew how much time had passed since the accident and clearly recalled how the accident happened. But Gage had difficulty estimating sizes and amounts of money. After a few months, he was well enough to return to his parents' house in New Hampshire. While Gage was recovering, Dr. Harlow was told by many of Gage's friends and family that he didn't seem the same. People described him as no longer being Gage. Before the accident, he was a hard-working and pleasant man. After the accident, he was described as a surly, aggressive, heavy drinker with the grossest profanity. He couldn't stick to plans and didn't respect other people. Because of his personality change, the railroad construction company didn't hire him back on. This caught Dr. Harlow's attention. In the 1800s, medicine was not very advanced in neuroscience. So, to see a personality change after brain trauma was a major revelation. Before this accident, phrenologists would measure bumps on people's skulls to assess people's personalities. Phineas Gage's accident and personality change was the first evidence that your brain controls personality. Dr. Harlow would go on to write a paper that appeared in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal in late 1848. This would become one of the most celebrated papers and helped establish neuroscience as we know it today. It would take some time until scientists and doctors figured out what happened to make Gage a different person mentally. Although Gage wasn't welcome back to the railroad, he spent some time traveling around New England and Europe doing odd tamping jobs for money. After traveling around for a bit, he returned to New Hampshire and worked in a livery stable. But he had problems holding down jobs. The longest job he held was as a long-haul stagecoach driver in Chile. He worked for them for 7 years until his health declined. Gage moved to San Francisco, California to be with his mother, who took care of him. On May 21, 1860, Phineas Gage died after he suffered a series of epileptic seizures. He was only 36 years old. 12 years after the accident, neuroscience's most famous patient was buried. However, he wouldn't stay buried. 7 years later, Gage's brother had him exhumed and donated his skull to Dr. Harlow and the tamping iron that traveled through it. Dr. Harlow published a final paper in 1868 in which he recounted what he was able to learn from Gage. He donated Gage's skull and the tamping rod to the Harvard University School of Medicine. You can still see the exhibit today in the museum. In the decades after his death, Gage's case can be found in almost all neuroscience textbooks. Malcolm Macmillan, an honorary professor at the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences and author of An Odd Kind of Fame, Stories of Phineas Gage, said he was the first case you could say fairly definitively that injury to the brain produced some kind of change in personality. In the 1940s, Stanley Cobb, a famous neurologist, diagrammed the skull to determine the path the tamping rod went through. With the advancement in technology, they recreated the diagram using CT scans. In 1994, researchers constructed a 3D model in which they discovered the reason for the personality change. As neuroscience developed, it was determined that Gage's accident happened in the perfect location. The path the rod traveled through missed areas of the brain such as the preagoid plexus and the cadaverous sinus, which, if hit, would have caused him to bleed out and die. They discovered that the rod damaged both the left and right prefrontal cortexes. These are highly important areas that control a person's emotional processing, rational decision-making, language, and social cognition. More recent studies of the brain found the effects were more limited to the left frontal lobe. During a 2012 study, researchers combined a CT scan of Gage's skull and an MRI scan of typical brains. It showed the brain's wiring and where the rod went through. They estimated that it destroyed approximately 11% of white matter in the frontal lobe and 4% of the cerebral cortex. So luckily for Phineas Gage, the rod missed all those areas for him to survive, and lucky for us, that changed his personality. It was lucky for us because we now have a better understanding of neuroscience. Number 1. Jean Hilliard. On the very cold night of December 20th, 1980, 19-year-old Jean Hilliard was driving back to her parents' home in Langby, Minnesota. While driving down a country road, her car slid off the road and became stuck in a ditch. Trying to get the car back on the road only caused the vehicle to fall deeper into the ditch. While sitting there, Hilliard ran a few options through her head. She thought if she stayed in the car with it running, she would suffer from carbon monoxide poisoning, or someone who came across her while she was alone could harm her. Being on a country road, she also feared that no one would come for her for a long time. Knowing a friend's house just down the road, Hilliard decided to walk back there and get help. It was a decision she would later regret. That night in Minnesota, the weather was about 30 degrees below Celsius with a wind chill factor of minus 20 degrees Celsius. That's about minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 7 degrees Fahrenheit. She was only dressed in a thin sweater, parka, jeans, and cowboy boots. She did not have a hat or a hood. Hilliard set out towards her friend's house, feeling the cold, but she wasn't worried because she was used to the cold weather. Not knowing how far she was from her friend's house, the cold weather slowed her down. She would walk up a hill and think the house would be there, but it wasn't. After an hour of walking, Hilliard saw her friend's house through the trees. She had already walked about 2 miles. Relieved, Hilliard headed towards the house, and that was the last thing she remembers. While walking towards the house, she said everything went black. Hilliard stumbled to her hands and knees and tried crawling to the doorstep, but she lost consciousness. Just lying feet from the door of her friend Wally Nelson's home, she remained there in the snow for the next 6 hours. Nelson, who was Hilliard's boyfriend's best friend, came out that morning to a surprise. Having hung out with Hilliard and her boyfriend the night before, drinking and dancing at the Boston American Legion, Nelson was shocked to find her frozen stiff on his front lawn. Her face was pale and her eyes were frozen wide open. He grabbed her by the collar and dragged her into his house. Thinking she was dead, he noticed bubbles coming out of her nose. He recruited the woman he brought home the night before to help him load Hilliard into his truck. However, she was frozen solid, so they couldn't get her into the cab of his truck. So they had to load her into Nelson's overnight friend's car. He said it was a very awkward way to end the night. Nelson rushed her to the Boston hospital, where doctors were not optimistic. She was frozen solid and stiff as a wooden board. She also had frostbite all over her body. The nurses hooked her to the heart rate monitor and saw that she had a gonal rhythm. The nurses described it as one beat, then flat for a while, but it was a sign of life. Hilliard's core temperature was 27 degrees Celsius, or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. A normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, or 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Her body was so frozen that they could not pierce it with a needle to start an IV. They broke a couple of needles trying. Because of the amount of frostbite on her body, doctors worried that her internal organs would suffer from hypothermia and they would have shut down. For them, the most optimistic outcome was that she would have brain damage or a double leg amputation. With a grim outlook, the doctors decided to warm up her body and try to do their best for survival. At this time, her pastor was called and told the unsettling news. The pastor started a prayer chain. After getting heating pads and wrapping Hilliard in blankets, her body returned to normal in a couple of hours. 2 hours into defrosting, she went into violent spasms. Though it seemed scary, it was a good sign because it meant life was returning to her body. By the next morning, Hilliard was awake. Despite doctors' fears, Hilliard did not suffer any brain damage, and her legs remained on her body with no damage for frostbite. Coming back from being an ice block, her only worry was that her dad would be mad at her because she got the car stuck in the ditch. After 49 days in the hospital, Hilliard was discharged with only some numb toes and blisters. Hilliard's story became national news and she became somewhat of a minor celebrity. She toured local churches telling her story and how she believes prayer helped save her life. Talk shows had her on as a guest. She appeared on the Today Show and was interviewed by Tom Brokaw. Her story appeared on the February 9, 1996 episode of Unsolved Mysteries. After her 15 minutes of fame, she returned to normal life. She got married and had 3 children. She later divorced and moved to Cambridge, Minnesota, where she works at Walmart. She says she kept waiting for something to happen to her medically after the accident, but reports no lingering health issues. However, now she bundles up and stays off the back roads on icy nights. So how did Hilliard survive being frozen solid and return to life with no health issues? David Plummer, a professional of emergency medicine at the University of Minnesota, has somewhat of an explanation for Hilliard's case. He says that as a person cools down, their blood flow slows and their body requires less oxygen. It's like a form of hibernation. If their blood flow increases at the same rate as their body warms up, they can often recover. Today, doctors have a special medical device that warms patients' blood in a heater, then pumps it back into them, warming up their vital organs. Although there is no guarantee of survival, this is the best chance of dealing with extreme hypothermia. In 1980, they did this with just heat pads and blankets, so Dr. Plummer is surprised and can't explain how Hilliard recovered in such a small rural hospital and had no lasting health issues. But for Hilliard, she claims it was the help of a prayer chain and a miracle. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.